There is something deeply human about the idea of meeting yourself again. Not in a mirror, not in memory, but face to face. The younger version still carrying hunger, fear, pride, and unfinished dreams. The older version carrying scars, survival, and the quiet wisdom that only time can give. And maybe that is why The Shawshank Redemption still feels so powerful, even more than 30 years after its release. It is not just a prison story. It is a story about what happens when time tests a soul, and whether hope can survive long enough to become freedom. The film premiered in September 1994, was directed and written by Frank Darabont from Stephen King's novella Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption, starred Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman, and earned 7 Academy Award nominations. It was not a big Oscar winner, and its original theatrical box office was modest, but its legacy only grew stronger with time. When the film first arrived in 1994, it did not immediately look like a giant cultural event. That year was crowded with landmark titles. Forrest Gump won Best Picture at the 1995 Academy Awards, while Pulp Fiction and many other major films competed for attention. The Shawshank Redemption left the Oscars empty-handed, despite nominations for Best Picture, Best Actor for Morgan Freeman, Adapted Screenplay, Cinematography, Editing, Score, and Sound. Yet over the years, the movie did something rarer than winning trophies. It became a film people carried with them. Its achievements are now measured less by one award season and more by endurance. It was added to the U.S. National Film Registry in 2015 for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. The American Film Institute placed it at number 72 on its 10th anniversary list of the greatest American films. And as of now, it still sits at number 1 on IMDb's Top 250, ahead of The Godfather and The Dark Knight in audience ranking. That does not prove it is objectively the greatest film ever made, but it does show something undeniable. Generations of viewers still return to it, and still feel changed by it. That is the strange beauty of Shawshank. It ages well because it was never built on trends. It was built on emotional fundamentals: injustice, friendship, routine, despair, dignity, patience, and hope. Andy Dufresne does not survive because he is the strongest man in the room. Red does not become unforgettable because he gives speeches. They matter because they endure. One keeps believing quietly. The other learns, very slowly, to believe again. And that makes the film feel perfect for Selfie With Time concept, because the whole story is really about the distance between who you were when life broke you and who you become if you keep going anyway. If we imagine the cast meeting their younger selves today, the emotional weight becomes even stronger. Tim Robbins, who played Andy Dufresne, remains one of the faces most permanently linked to the film. He is still an active creative figure, though not as constantly visible on screen as in earlier decades. His more recent screen credits are far less frequent than before, which makes him feel less like someone who vanished and more like someone who stepped back from the center of the spotlight while maintaining a respected legacy. Morgan Freeman, who played Ellis Redredding, is still very much active. Even in his late 80s, he has continued acting, and recent reporting in 2025 made clear that although he has spoken honestly about aging and a dimmer appetite than before, he has not retired. In fact, he has continued taking roles, including returning to the Now You See Me franchise. That matters, because Freeman's voice in Shawshank became more than narration. It became the film's moral memory. Bob Gunton, unforgettable as Warden Norton, is still credited as an actor, including work in The Inheritance in 2024. He is not as publicly prominent as some of the others, but he has not disappeared from the profession. He feels like one of those veterans whose screen presence remains instantly recognizable even when the spotlight is smaller. William Sadler, who played Haywood, also remains active, with recent credits including Salem's Lot in 2024 and other current projects listed on IMDb. His career has stretched across decades without losing that grounded, lived-in quality that made him so believable inside Shawshank's walls. Clancy Brown, the terrifying Captain Hadley, is still highly active and perhaps one of the busiest of the group, working across both live action and voice acting. Recent credits include Fallout, The Penguin, and ongoing voice work, proving that some performers do not slow down so much as evolve into new forms of presence. Gil Bellows, who played Tommy, is also still working, with recent television credits including Law and Order Toronto, Criminal Intent, and The Irrational. Mark Ralston, who played Boggs, remains active as well, with recent credits listed in 2025. Jeffrey DeMunn, who appeared as the district attorney in the trial sequence and became a frequent Frank Darabont collaborator, also still has recent and upcoming credits, including work listed for 2025 and 2026. So when people ask who from the Shawshank Redemption is still active, the answer is actually moving in its own way. Many of them are. Time has passed, faces have changed, bodies have aged, but the craft did not simply end. For several of them, the younger self inside Shawshank is not a ghost. It is a chapter they still carry forward. Now, who has stepped away from the stage? The honest answer is that among the principal recognizable cast, there is less evidence of total retirement than of changing visibility. Some, like Tim Robbins, appear less frequently on screen than they once did. Some, like Bob Gunton, are no longer mainstream headlines but still continue working. Others have shifted partly into television, voice work, or selective appearances rather than dominating cinema the way they once might have. So it is more accurate to say that several members of the cast have moved away from the center of Hollywood attention, not necessarily away from acting itself. And who has passed away? The most important loss among the film's principal cast is James Whitmore, who played Brooks Hatlin. Whitmore died on February 6, 2009, at age 87. In a film about institutional time, Brooks may be the character who hurts the most, because he shows what happens when a man survives prison but cannot survive the world beyond it. Whitmore's performance remains one of the emotional hinges of the film, and his death adds another layer of poignancy when we look back now. And that brings us to the hardest question. Has any film surpassed The Shawshank Redemption? The answer depends on what surpassed means. If you mean awards, then yes. Many films surpassed it. Forrest Gump beat it for Best Picture in 1995, and countless films have won more trophies. If you mean critical canon, then yes, depending on the institution. In the 2022 Sight and Sound Critics poll, the #1 film of all time was Gene Dealman, 23K du Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles, not Shawshank. That poll reflects critical consensus, not mass audience sentiment. But if you mean popular emotional permanence, the kind of film ordinary people recommend with absolute conviction, the kind they quote, revisit, and hold close during difficult years, then The Shawshank Redemption is still almost impossible to beat. Its IMDb #1 ranking is one sign of that. More important is the way it lives in people. It is one of those rare films that is not merely admired. It is relied on. That may be the real reason your young self and old self visual idea fits this movie so well. Because The Shawshank Redemption is not really about escape in the ordinary sense. It is about the long conversation between despair and hope. Between the person who thinks life is over and the person who keeps a small piece of the future alive. Between who we were inside the walls and who we might still become beyond them. If young Andy stood beside older Tim Robbins, maybe he would see not victory, but endurance. If young Red stood beside older Morgan Freeman, maybe he would see what grace looks like after decades. If Brooks could stand beside James Whitmore one more time, maybe the sadness would remain, but so would the tenderness. And that is the core value of this film, the reason it never really grows old. Hope is not naive. Hope is discipline. Hope is what survives routine. Hope is what survives humiliation. Hope is what survives time. That is why The Shawshank Redemption still matters in 2026. Not because it won the most. Not because it shouted the loudest. But because it understood something most people only learn the hard way. A person can lose years. A person can lose freedom. A person can lose almost everything. But if they do not lose the small inner voice that says, keep going, then the story is not over. And maybe that is what a selfie with your younger and older self really means. It means looking at the person you once were, and the person time made you, and realizing that between them lives a quiet miracle. You survived long enough to meet yourself again.